Welcome to today's live stream, everybody. And we are talking about Tucker Carlson's 9/11 files, which I found to be generally useful. I think anytime anyone's covering the subject, it can be useful, especially if they're not like Popular Mechanics trying to just promote the official lies. Now, the reason I have some challenges with this is I feel like it's a bit of a limited hangout. For those of you unfamiliar with the term limited hangout, it's a way to keep people from going deeper into an issue by giving them some crumbs of truth. I felt for some time that Alex Jones, for example, is a type of limited hangout, but you don't learn these things until later. And even in his limited hangout form, I think Tucker does manage to do some good, and I appreciate what he covered. I learned a few things myself. I always say that the James Corbett summary of 9/11 is the most comprehensive, despite being only 3 minutes in its tongue-in-cheek way of delivering all this information. He gives you a lot of different paths, 24 different paths that you can go through just from what he refers to. For example, Able Danger, which isn't referred to here. So I'm just going to put a link in the live chat to that James Corbett 3-minute summary. Check it out. So despite it being a limited hangout, I do think there are some important things to learn. I'll start with the interview by Mark Rossini. He uses quite a bit of profanity, but I think it's still helpful. He talks about his CIR being held up, the one that he wrote with Doug Miller, and trying to alert the FBI to what is going on with the Al-Qaeda switchboard in the Hada home in Sana'a, Yemen. Also about what has been pointed out in numerous documentaries, the John Brennan CIA station chief in Jeddah making sure that these visas were approved. We have a number of visas for Saudi nationals being approved in the consulate in Jeddah. And this seemed to be a basic fast track for these individuals to come to the United States, get flight training, and be supervised by us. We have the CIA hiding the fact that these Al-Qaeda people are coming to the United States, despite having people in place to monitor a meeting that they had in Kuala Lumpur. We also have the CIA blocking the 9/11 commission from investigating any of this. And this is probably what's hanging over the entire documentary is Tucker keeps referring back to the 9/11 commission, which is true. That is the official story. And he ends by saying, we need a new commission, which makes me feel like Tucker hasn't actually watched anything that he's just delivered to us, to believe that a government that could lie to its people for so many years. And this is just one thing. We're not talking about JFK. We're not talking about anything else, that somehow the government will repent and actually tell the truth that there was a new independent commission. So I understand Tucker's trying to look for something actionable, but for something to be actionable, it has to be realistic. And to postulate that we need a new 9/11 commission, I'm already getting beef from people to even be covering 9/11. And I've said part of the reason I'm doing this now is people are more open post-COVID to looking at things. Prior to COVID, a lot of people were in normie land. And after COVID, when they saw the government saying, you will take this shot, or you're going to lose your job, or you're going to be canceled as a person, that was what it took to wake them up, to say, okay, well, is it possible that the government is not telling me the truth about not just one thing, but many things? And so 9/11 is back on the table. And the fact that Tucker Carlson, who's a fairly mainstream person, is now talking about this stuff, I think shows that it's a good time to get back into the practice of questioning and looking at sources and postulating cui bono for all of these things. He talks about Omar al-Bayoumi, who's a Saudi cutout, someone who had a do-nothing job, just drew salary, do-nothing job, no-show job, and just drew a salary. And because the CIA was able to source intelligence from him through what Omar was doing, who he was interacting with, it circumvented the rules prior to 9/11 on the CIA spying on U.S. soil. So Omar al-Bayoumi is one of these cutouts that the CIA use. I love the fact that we have a big spotlight shown on Philip Zelikow. I think that he's someone who flies under the radar a lot, except for those who are really interested in 9/11 truth. Philip Zelikow was a tool of the administration, but he acted on his own as well to outline the 9/11 Commission report, and that his outline matches almost exactly what the final document ended up being. So he basically said, here is how this is going to be investigated. We're going to allow this. We're not going to allow this. And always pushing for the we have no evidence of as text in the document. But if Zelikow was part of restricting access to documents, then that would also be true. If you can't get to evidence, then it can be truthful to say in the final commission report, we have no evidence of. But what they don't say is Philip Zelikow blocked us from even investigating this. And Zelikow does this over and over and over. Easy for him to do because he's in the shadows, working with Condi Rice. Find out that he's calling Karl Rove all the time. What is the president's chief of staff? What does he have to do with the 9/11 Commission report? This is an investigation about national security. It's not questioning what is going to be on the president's schedule. And so this sort of collusion, the frequency of the telephone calls with Rove about this, ostensibly about this, obviously they could have been talking about other things, but it's not as if Rove had anything to contribute to the 9/11 Commission report from an intelligence standpoint. So Zelikow back there also using Robert Mueller, the useful idiot. Mueller is used to do whatever his superiors tell him to do. And he attacks a lot of these people who are asking for documents around 9/11. So scare tactics. So Philip Zelikow, I'm very glad that he plays a pretty prominent role in Tucker's documentary. And he's someone people need to look into more, Philip Zelikow. I also love that he talked to Kristen Breitweiser. So those who don't know, there were the Jersey girls, the widows of I think 3 or 4 men. And I didn't know that Kristen was a lawyer as well, but she talks about this agenda. She talks about the fact she gives us more detail about what was always alluded to, that she was one of the people who pressed Henry Kissinger on who his Saudi clients were and if there were any conflicts of interest. And after the meeting with her and the other Jersey girls, Kissinger resigns the next day, but not before turning up the heat in his office. She said it was very hot in there on purpose, I think, to make them feel uncomfortable. And he got so nervous he spilled coffee on some documents. So they ask, what are your conflicts of interest? Do you have any clients named bin Laden? And Kissinger resigns the next day, which for me is hilarious that Kissinger is checkmated by some civilians who do not have an intelligence background. This man used to hold simultaneously Secretary of State and the National Security Advisor position, an unbelievable combination of power within the executive branch. And we see it happening now with Marco Rubio, who Max Blumenthal, I think, rightly calls Narco Rubio. Go and investigate Marco Rubio's connections to drug trafficking, apart from his neocon crazy agenda. So Kristen Breitweiser, one of the people who helps take down Henry Kissinger from the 9/11 Commission, but it doesn't make it any less of a whitewash. It just means the credit has to be given that she removes Henry Kissinger from running the commission, which would have made it even more of a whitewash than it ended up being. She had good words to say about Thomas Kean, who was one of the people running the commission, but Thomas Kean had said that the commission was set up to fail, that it was underfunded, sabotaged in many ways. We have other members of the commission resigning in disgust over it. We also see printouts, readouts from communications within the administration, see if Saddam did this after 9/11 because Wolfowitz and his cronies wanted to pursue a war against Iraq, and this was a plausible excuse. So it'd be as if a neighbor potentially had, done something to your lawn, and then you decide, well, I think we should take a look at destroying the entire neighborhood as a result. Famously, and this isn't mentioned, the Taliban asked for evidence that Osama bin Laden was guilty of this crime. We produced no evidence. And on his FBI most wanted poster, The charge of being responsible for 9/11 was not listed. And when pressed on this, they said, we don't have any evidence linking. We are an investigative agency, the FBI, and if we don't have the evidence of something, we can't ask for someone to be arrested for that. I do also like the fact that Kofor Black is mentioned here, but I thought Michael Chertoff was a pretty big miss, and his conflicts of interest regarding TSA post 9/11. So I think that's another name people should look at. I love that George Tenet was mentioned. He is another. This is the man who said that it was a slam dunk about weapons of mass destruction. He was another one who, at the end of the documentary, rather depressingly, Tucker points out that all of these people who were responsible for the cover up of 9/11 have all gone on to profit and make a lot of money. We also see what is a direct contradiction of what Condi Rice, the president at the time, said. We had no idea that anyone was going to use planes to fly into buildings, despite the fact that the presidential daily briefing numerous times highlighted the fact that not only was Al-Qaeda determined to strike in the U.S., I think that was the headline in April of 2000, sorry, I'm so used to saying 2020 anymore. I think it was April 2001 in the presidential daily briefing. Al-Qaeda determined to strike in the U.S. We have numerous exercises, simulations of planes crashing into buildings after being hijacked, one of which was a simulation that was running on September the 11th. What a coincidence. I'm sure that has nothing to do with confusing the people who were in the exercise and could have responded to the real world problem. Very famously, we have that quote, is this real world or exercise? Why would you ask a question like that? Because you were running an exercise on the same day by cosmic coincidence. I also like the fact that Tucker points out the bin Laden issue, although I think you have to go to James Corbett to see more of how bin Laden is effectively just used as a CIA asset and as a boogeyman. Whenever anything's bad, we say Turban Man bad, as some people might say Orange Man bad. So Turban Man bad, and then he shows up whenever necessary until he was no longer necessary, and then mysteriously buried at sea with no evidence. So bin Laden always seemed to get away at the last moment. And Tucker alludes to this a little bit. I think he could have pushed a little harder on this, but he simply, one of the ways you could take the implication was pushing towards incompetence. So I like the fact that this was pointed out that bin Laden always seems to get away. World Trade Center 7, he says, and I'm trying to remember the exact wording from the documentary, but it's something along the lines of World Trade Center 7 was hit by debris. But this is the same comment that someone had put in one of my shorts recently. Oh, Barry Jennings died of cancer. Okay, fine. I don't know exactly why Barry Jennings died, but the point is that he said he heard explosions. And there is a difference between explosions and something hitting in one place. So explosions happening multiple times. If the debris does hit WTC-7, it would have hit once. That's it. And the idea that something hitting a building sounds like explosions, especially when there were two buildings standing in the way between WTC-1 and 2 and 7, there were two other buildings, to say nothing of the fact that WTC 3 and 4, which sat below 1 and 2, had all of the stuff fall on top of them. But they did not collapse. So explain to me how WTC 3 and 4, who have all of the debris of WTC 1 and 2, fall on top of them, they don't collapse. But Building 7, which is behind two other buildings, screened, has some debris fall on it, I'm sure. But then that collapses into a total footprint. And then Tucker somewhat hedging this WTC 7 collapse by saying, well, if you look, it doesn't seem like a controlled demolition, except that's exactly what it does. That penthouse falling first is part of that earlier crimp. If you look at how the foundations run up, that the penthouse falling first is a canary in the coal mine of only another second or so as part of a global collapse. So he's saying, well, it can't be a controlled demolition. So he's trying to take some middle ground on WTC-7. It's not a controlled demolition. It wasn't destroyed by fires. It was 100% a controlled demolition. You have to disbelieve your eyes when you're looking at the video to believe that. You have to disbelieve what Larry Silverstein said when he said, we made the decision to pull it. we have to disbelieve all the reports from firefighters and police chiefs who said this building is coming down. Who told them that? We have to disbelieve Jane Stanley as she's reporting on the BBC 20 minutes before that the building has collapsed. So the narrative of the building collapsing, it was predetermined. It was predetermined, and it was given. The order was given by Larry Silverstein, who had already insured his buildings and made sure that this building was going to come down as well. Mysteriously, we have a bunch of people in there: the Secret Service, the Securities and Exchange Commission, doing an investigation on Enron at the time. All of these files mysteriously disappear. To say nothing of the gold theft in the WTC 1 and 2, there's just smoking guns everywhere. I understand that Tucker can't go in all of these directions, but I would have liked if he had said, if you'd like to look further into this issue, this is also a problem. He has the time and the resources to do it. I understand he's packaging it in YouTube form, and he's thinking, okay, I can only do 20 minutes an episode. That's the maximum time length, attention span of modern man. Fine. But sorry about that. We had a power outage here, and I'd love to say that it was down to people who were defending the 9/11 Commission report, but we're not that important, right? So thank you for those of you who stayed on. Sorry about that. I wonder how this will look in the final cut of this live stream. But what I was saying was that I understand that Tucker and his team are thinking about these 20-minute segments, and that this is the only attention span that people have these days. But what he could have done at the end of every episode was saying, here are the things you can look into further that I only pulled a little bit of the thread at in this documentary. So I think that's something I would have liked to have seen from him more, because he alludes to things that are very normy. As I said, sorry, not as I said, as he referred to the first WTC bombing as normal. He didn't talk about the fact that this was an FBI prompted event, that they went along and encouraged this whole thing. So the highlighting of the NSA refusal to cooperate, I also appreciate that. Didn't cooperate with our internal agencies, probably also didn't cooperate with the 9/11 Commission report. He highlights the fact that the US government has the name of the individual who put the put options on United and American Airlines, but didn't cash in those put options, because then we would definitely know who his name was. But he doesn't provide a name of an agency for who is holding back that information. So I don't know where he got that. We talk a little bit about the Israeli art students, as they are called, the dancing Israelis, as I keep referring back to James Corbett, because he has done all of the work on this for decades. And it's very well done. So if you just Google Dancing Israelis, James Corbett, I've also done a live on this channel about that. So if you can't find it, if you go to the live stream I did on the Dancing Israelis, separate from the different, he puts together a list of different people who were involved with 9/11. There's a 30-minute segment of that which I did as a standalone episode, and he, in that description of that video, I have a link to finding it on Odyssey or elsewhere on YouTube if you can't find it. I love that he talks about Guantanamo Bay and the fact that 80 to 85% of the people who were imprisoned there as enemy combatants, held without trial, held without charges. How can anyone say that America believes in freedom and values and democracy, all of the blah, 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 when they just hold people indefinitely without charges, without trial, and then found out we tortured them too? And admitted, not only in other places, but in this documentary, 80 to 85% of the people held in Guantanamo were innocent. They were people who were caught up in tribal conflicts back in Afghanistan, and the neighbor decided to make some money. So I was having trouble with this neighbor. I'm going to report him to the Americans as Al Qaeda. And then they go there, they get tortured. Points out that Zarqawi confesses to the murder of Daniel Pearl, but someone else has confessed and been convicted of that sometime before, and that Zarqawi was under torture. He was going to say whatever they wanted him to say. That's what happens under torture, and this was what we went to war for. And I appreciate, again, at the end of the documentary, a recounting of all of those horrible things that have happened as a result of 9/11. Horrible for everyone except Israel. I might note, things have only been good. And the quote from Benjamin Netanyahu that 9/11 was good, and then he corrected himself. It's good for us to be united. But remember that Benjamin Netanyahu is also in London on the day of the 7/7 bombings. What a surprise. What a strange coincidence. So overall, I recommend the 9/11 Files by Tucker Carlson as an intro, maybe for your normie relatives, maybe for the boomers in your life who like Tucker, because it's a great way to get them started on some of these points. So I think he does a good enough job in the documentary of shredding the credibility of the 9/11 Commission. Once that is shredded, then you can start asking deeper questions. All right, what would you like to talk about first? Would you like to talk about the planes? Do you want to talk about Hani Hanjour? Do you want to talk about Building 7? Do you want to talk about the lies of Barbara Olson calling Ted Olson from a plane at 30,000 feet on her cell phone? Do we want to talk about the fact he alludes to, but he doesn't go into too much detail, about the fact that Flight 93 was so incinerated by the impact, but they still managed to find passports? Those indestructible Saudi passports. You can have it in the pocket of a hijacker, and when it crashes into the World Trade Center building, that passport can just fly out of the pocket and land on the ground for the FBI to find. So once you shred the credibility of the 9/11 Commission report, then you can start asking deeper questions. And I saw this at a talk many years ago, in which someone who knew a lot about the JFK assassination came to talk, and the people in the audience were people who were probably in their teenage years at the time of the Kennedy assassination. And he said, how many of you believed the Warren Commission report, when it first came out? And I would say, 90% of the room raised their hand. And he said, those of you who weren't alive yet, don't raise your hand. And there's, I don't know, 6 of us in the room, but let's say 80 hands went up, because all of those men in the room were of that age. And then said, how many of you believe the Warren Commission report today? And I would say 80% of those hands went down. So there were still 20% of the 80% who still believe the official story, normie till they die, and then they'll find out. So I think enough time has passed between the 9/11 Commission report and here we are 2025 at the dawn of 2026, the edge of 2026, that people are finally not emotional about it. And they've gone through COVID. They've seen the government lie to them. They've seen their so-called friends turn on them. And those are the circumstances by which sometimes people are willing to question the narratives that are just handed down to us as if they were religious gospel truths. So the links are in the description to watch the documentaries, which you can watch. I still am bewildered as to why Tucker needs advertising money. So he gets plenty from his subscribers. He gets money from YouTube, but he still has to insert ads inside the videos. I've said this before, and I'll probably do a live stream about it sometime. I do not believe that advertising can pay for the internet. This has been a lie that has been sold about the internet from the beginning, that advertising can pay for the internet. The internet offers so much more than what advertising can deliver. Advertising can only pay for a part of it if you even wanted to. The best way is to simply support the person. That wasn't possible in the past. You could support a newspaper if you wanted to call it that, but the newspaper was heavily subsidized by the advertisers. And now everything's so unbundled that you're able to support an individual journalist, someone like James Corbett, who I'm very proud to support on a regular basis, or people like Max Blumenthal, The Gray Zone, or the people at Breaking Points. These are people doing real work. You can support them directly. The idea that I have to watch an ad in order to support you is a waste of everybody's time. And while I get that some of the products that Tucker are pushing are actually helpful, I think he has a meat company that sells directly from farmers. I think that's great. The point is that you shouldn't have to soak your audience over and over for this stuff in the middle of when you already have subscribers and you already have revenue from YouTube for the people who are not paying, like myself, YouTube Premium to watch without ads. So just a little bit of beef there about advertising being the way to pay for the internet. I don't know why people still believe in this lie. Advertising cannot pay for the internet. Advertising cannot even pay for individual creators. You have to find a way to support those creators directly, whether if it's by a monthly subscription or buying things that they are selling. I think those are the ways that you can support creators. This advertising thing always has to be considered as a side income, if that. And even then, it can be mitigated if those products are not worth selling. I feel a lot of podcasters, YouTubers are willing to take anybody who comes and knocks on their door and says, hey, will you talk about this green powder? Or will you talk about this pillow? Or will you talk about this mattress? So I think we have better things to do than to kowtow towards advertising as a way to pay for the internet. But I'll leave that lesson to contemplate on different future live stream. For now, I've got to head over to Palestine Bookshelf. We're doing a review of a documentary called Voices Across the Divide, which was done by Alice Rothschild, who I had a chance to speak with briefly over the summer. It's too early on the West Coast where she is for her to come on the live stream, but I told her I'd send her a link afterwards. So if you want to learn more about Palestine, head over to Palestine Bookshelf. I will be there in another minute or two, assuming that the power doesn't go out again. Thanks for stopping by, and let's keep the discussion going in the comments as always.